Hey guys, welcome back for today's lecture on Tuesday, April 28th. Yesterday we talked about Eisenhower and brinkmanship and tensions escalating in Southeast Asia as well as Cuba. We're going to continue brinkmanship today, and we're going to get into a little bit of the economic connection to the Cold War. To come out of the Cold War is a phrase known as the military-industrial complex. It was talked about by President Dwight Eisenhower in his farewell address on his way out of office. He serves his 8 years. On his way out, he warns the people of a possible military-industrial complex. Now, a military-industrial complex, or an MIC, is an informal alliance between a nation's military and the defense industry that supplies it. So defense industry is just an independently owned or operated, whether it's like a weapons supplier, weapons, I don't want to say dealer because it sounds illegal, but like whether it's gun manufacturers or the manufacturers that isolate and sell uranium, or the other chemicals or atoms that are used to create atomic weapons or nuclear weapons. He warns against the over cooperation between these two sides. Now, on the surface, an alliance between those two seems beneficial, right? Well, the government gets weapons, which then creates security, and then those independent industries get work. They get money. They get to raise money, so it goes back into the economy. And yeah, on the surface, that seems like a good thing, but when it's abused, really like anything else, it can be a negative. And Eisenhower addresses that and talks about how it could lead to over-reliance. Like if that's the number one way that your economy is making money is by creating weapons, especially weapons of mass destruction, then A, it's building up to something catastrophic, or B, once that threat goes away, then the government's not going to buy as many weapons, and that's going to create a shock to your economy. When you become over-reliant on something, that means if whatever you're reliant on gets disturbed, then the whole economy is going to shake from it. And it also just gives way too much power, like economic power, to a couple independent industries. And power can fall into the wrong hands. And so part of his speech, he says, in the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. So be careful of putting all your eggs into this one basket, because those people may abuse all of the power and money you're giving them. And that's kind of what happens later on. Like when the Soviet Union falls apart in late 80s, early 90s, then we dial back our weapons. Like we don't pay as much. And the whole economy, we see a bit of a recession in the early 90s. Now, it's not all because of the military-industrial complex. There was a couple things that factored into it, but it certainly didn't help. And so this fuels the arm race that we're about to see, or that we're seeing at the time, building up of all the stockpiling all these weapons, and then just having a country that is just way too over reliant on military spending. And we're still massively reliant on military spending. In 2018, the United States spent $650 billion on what they call defense spending, which is basically military, whether it's weapons or whatever. 650 billion. Second highest country was China at 250 billion. And then after that, nobody had more than like 20 billion in the world. The US by itself made up over a third of the world's spending on military in 2018, and it'll just continue to grow. We spend more than the next 20 countries combined, I believe 19 of which are allies. That's just insane. So much money. And you think, well, there's wasting money. Well, no, because the money does, for the most part, go back into the economy. Like, we're not all of our weapons, but most of our weapons are American made. And so it goes into the economy. But again, the problem is that money could be put somewhere else. We're not even at war with anybody or in a threat of war with anybody. And we're spending that much. But that's the way we operate now. So that's a military-industrial complex. Now, Eisenhower's out. John Fitzgerald Kennedy is new president. And he makes a change from brinkmanship to flexible response. And his Secretary of Defense is a man named Robert McNamara. McNamara's a little different. Now, he was a soldier in World War II, so he's got some military background. But when World War II ends, he becomes like a front office analyst for Ford Motor Company. And he kind of he helps revolutionize the automotive industry during the 50s. But he's not like a lot of secretaries of defense have extensive military backgrounds. McNamara was a soldier, but that's about all of his military experience. But he was an analyst. He was very smart and very thrifty economic-wise, but he was a little less measured with his military acumen. So he decides to update our nation's military strategies and technologies. He decides that brinkmanship's not a good idea. Escalating things to the point of near disaster is not a good idea. We see that in the Cuban Missile Crisis. So he develops, with Kennedy, flexible response. Be able to adapt. Don't set your feet, in the sand or refuse to move. Be able to adapt and be willing to work with your opponent. And that becomes a huge staple in the foreign policy of John F. Kennedy. He was very, very good at working with the opposition. So some things that he takes part in are the Alliance for Progress. It was an agreement with Latin American countries. The U.S. would help support them economically as they try and modernize Latin America was really struggling economically, and their people were poor and uneducated and growing weary of the world around them. And so Kennedy tries to create this alliance where they become economically indebted to the U.S. Like the U.S. would loan them money and give them materials and things that they could use to try and build the country and build their economies. So they would benefit that way, and the U.S. would benefit by basically being able to hold it over their heads. Like, hey, remember when we gave you all that money to get you out of the gutters? Well, now you're basically our puppets. And it actually kind of backfires, because while it does immediately help a lot of the countries and it builds their education system a lot, it lowers illiteracy, and it starts somewhat of a starter campaign on capitalism in those countries. It also leads to those countries building up their militaries, and then a lot of those countries, like Guatemala and uh, Nicaragua, as at least countries like Nicaragua, to their militaries get powerful or get strong, at least compared to the civilians. And a lot of military leaders would overthrow the government leaders, and then they'd establish their own military dictatorship. So then you have an oppressive dictatorship, and then the people decide to turn to communism. So then America's left with either supporting a military dictator who abuses the people or a communist. And you know which side America's gonna side with on that. So Central and Latin America have become very contentious and uh, very downtrodden, and a lot of it came from the failure of the Alliance for Progress. Now, Kennedy also creates a Peace Corps. Peace Corps is still around today. It's volunteers that travel around the world to try and help and build and modernize developing countries. Whether it's building schools or hospitals or working with local governments to try and modernize and benefit the people. Its effect is not huge, like it's not revolutionary. It doesn't necessarily have one big world-altering event, but it is a positive development. It is something that's still around today. And while their work is typically pretty small, I think it's a positive uh, change that is made. Um, Now, in 63, and remember, we're talking not only in the heat of the Cold War, but now we're getting into the middle of the Civil Rights Movement. So we got problems abroad and we got problems at home. So this is no easy time to be president. John F. Kennedy gives a speech at American University, which is in Washington, D.C. And in it, he talks about cooperation, and he talks about his search for peace, for world peace. And he takes a softened stance towards the Soviets. He mentions how no country got uh, devastated by World War II worse than the Soviet Union did. No people suffered more than the Soviet Union did. Now, that part's kind of debatable, but just the fact that it could possibly be said tells you how rough it got for the Russians. But he empathizes with them, and he recognizes, says, because the Cold War started so soon after World War II, that we as Americans forget the sacrifice that the Russians took and the effort that they put into defeating the Nazis. So there he kind of butters up the Russians. appreciates him. And he talks about how, oops, that popped up. About how he doesn't want war. He wants peace, and he wants the Soviets to coexist with him. And that speech it's marked as one of his greatest speeches. And that's saying something, because that's one thing Kennedy was good at. Man, could he talk. He was a great orator. And that speech earned him a lot of admiration from the government in the U.S. It also earned the respect of Khrushchev. Khrushchev was touched by it. He said that's the greatest speech he's ever heard an American give since FDR. Think about how much Khrushchev's opinion of Kennedy changed over the course of a couple of years. When Kennedy first took over and they had the Bay of Pigs invasion fall apart, which I haven't gotten to yet, I guess I forgot about that. He thinks Kennedy's a chump and a fool. And then after a few close calls and some disagreements, and now this, Kennedy has earned Khrushchev's respect and even possibly his admiration. This speech leads us into a nuclear test ban treaty. In '63, Kennedy, without even prompting, to show good faith, agrees to cut off all American nuclear bomb tests. He says if you're going to talk the talk, you got to walk the walk. So he cuts off all nuclear tests, and then he asks the rest of the world powers, like the Soviets and the Brits, to do the same, and they do. And since then, the U.S. nor Russia nor Britain nor France have tested nuclear weapons, at least not above ground or, to their full extent. But now he's also met with some crisis in Vietnam. North Vietnam and South Vietnam are fighting, and North Vietnam's communist. And South Vietnam is struggling. Kennedy sends over he sends McNamara over to South Vietnam to assess the situation. McNamara comes back and he goes, man, it is not good. South Vietnam is just getting clobbered. North Vietnamese are starting to sweep through, gain land, gain support. And South Vietnamese government, nobody believes in them. They are so unorganized, so shell-shocked, and just can't do anything. If we want to keep communism out of Southeast Asia, McNamara suggests that America get involved, which they're wanting to avoid, but Kennedy takes the advice of McNamara and starts to plan American involvement. But which ends up, Kennedy himself doesn't get us directly involved. His successor, LBJ, does, but it sets things in motion which are not going to work out well. So now our essential question, what is the military-industrial complex? I gave a pretty simple definition. First slide should be pretty easy. So that will be it for today, almost right at 20 minutes. So we'll call her good there. If you guys have any questions or concerns, please email me and I'll take care of them. Have a terrific day, everybody.